First of all, I want to start by looking at risk of material misstatement. Starting then by looking at this picture, which you may have seen from the past. I've used this on previous presentations as well. This is really the 6 things, or in this case the 5 things that make up risk of material misstatement. Note, risk at assertion level is of course inherent risk at assertion level as well as fraud risk at assertion level. Okay? What do you see missing from that you may have expected? You're probably asking me, where is control risk at assertion level? Now that is a very, very, very important thing. And here we're saying, well, at assertion level, surely I also have to consider whether controls are working, yes or no. Now yes, absolutely, I agree. ISA 315 says you must go and look at controls at the account balance level, if I can use that word. And the term that the standard uses for that is called control activities. Okay, let's move on to another slide which really puts out the 5 components of internal control. Here you can see the 5 components of internal control. Starting off with the control environment, the risk assessment process, the information system and communication system, then do we get control activities, and then of course monitoring. Now you may very well know that control activities comes up in 1150. We're going to spend some time on that today. But the other 4 of these components all come up in 1130, which is where we consider the control risk at the financial statement level. Alright, so you can see in probe we do actually consider all the elements of internal control. But today our focus is going to be on the control activities. And so from that then, having a look what the standard says is you must, as auditor, look at, okay, the words they say is obtain an understanding of control activities. So I must look at and say, are there controls? Nothing says I must test it. I just have to say, are there controls? And so where must I look at this? Well, firstly, for significant risks. Whenever I identify significant risk, I must go and look at those. If you think about the audit programs, or rather about the risk assessment process, that's where we may be going towards 1160 and 1161. Risks requiring non-substantive procedures, risks from IT, but then where my focus is going to be today is other relevant control activities. Now, I may have mentioned this to quite a number of you in the past already, but to me it's very, very important to say to you, where or how do I decide which control activities are relevant? Okay, how do I decide on that? Now, I want to now go to caseware and very specifically 1051. 1051 is where I want to go and have a look at this and say, how do I decide what controls would be relevant and which controls would not be relevant? We start off not by looking at the actual control, but we start off by looking at each of the accounts. You'll all be familiar with this screen. I'm specifically looking at property, plant and equipment because it can actually lead to quite a bit of discussion. Think about PPE. In some of your clients, you're going to say, you know what, here we simply have to test controls. And then it's going to be easy. You're going to say, yeah, well, when I get to this little bit here at the bottom that says, are controls in this section relevant to the audit? Yeah, they are relevant. But in other cases, I'm going to say, no. Most of you, or many of you, may be thinking, but listen, in our firm, we never, ever, ever test controls. So no, controls are not relevant. Well, here's the trick. We're not asking you, are you going to test controls? One of the considerations may be, are you going to maybe want to test controls? But that's not the question here. The question is, are controls relevant to the audit? And there I often ask myself, do I need to understand how the account balance came about in the trial balance to be able to audit that balance? Or is just the balance good enough for me? Now that's difficult to really say. I can't say, well, with this kind of company it's always going to be, or that industry, or yes, this account's always going to be relevant. All I can really tell you is that you have to decide whether it would be important for you to go and get more information. Now, I'm going to just run ahead of myself before I show you the screen, because this is where we have to make the decision. The consideration I give is to say, well, firstly, do I want an account, not account description, a cycle description? Do I feel it's necessary to explain the cycle in my audit file to be able to assess risks, to be able to test the controls or identify controls to be tested, or even just to design appropriate substantive procedures? Okay, now you might say to me, no, it's not necessary, but it may not be necessary. All right, so we start off then with saying, are controls relevant to the audit, yes or no? With something like property, plant and equipment, it may be a smallish company, simple, easy, I don't need to look at controls. But you can imagine a kind of company like one of the big retail stores that has thousands and thousands and thousands of tills, chairs, desks, shop fitting equipment, shelves, you name it, whatever you can think of in a big shop. Those guys have to have controls around their property, plant and equipment. I mean, go further to vehicles and whatnot. So there you may say, listen, I can't audit this account if I don't at least know whether the company's got controls in place. Okay. Remember, the consideration of controls includes, firstly, knowledge of the controls. So in other words, see whether their controls, are they properly designed. Secondly, whether they implemented, and only thirdly, whether they are operating efficiently. That's where we get to control testing. Before that, we're only really getting information. Okay, so that's really then what I get to. The last thing I want to mention on 10.51 is the one about related parties. Related parties, the question always comes up, why in life does this happen? With related parties, I don't have an option, yes or no, are controls relevant? No, I only have a yes. Okay, it's not a bug, please not. This is the way it is, and very specifically, because the auditing standard ISA 550, you can see there, we've put it there for you as a little tip there to say, the auditing standard says controls over related party transactions are always relevant to the audit. Now, what if you don't have related party transactions? Or what if you have related party transactions with a supplier? Your supplier is a related party and you purchase all your inventory from them. What am I going to focus on here? Well, the trick is you don't focus on the cycle because you've already considered the cycle in purchases, cost of sales, inventory, wherever. What you're considering here is the control activities around the collection of the information and the keeping record of the information of which transactions do we have with our related parties, who are our related parties, how do we ensure we actually disclose all of that on the financial statements. That's my focus here. Okay, and there every company will, I'm confident, every company will have some activity through which they ensure related parties are disclosed on the financial statements, the party themselves, the balance outstanding, the activities. Now, you might be laughing at me. Yes, I know. 99% of your clients may have the process, oh, the auditor comes in. I know. That is your client's process. Well, you know what? That might be a weakness in their system. And you may actually have to report to them and say, this is not good enough. Small company, maybe okay. But for other companies, they may actually need to take some more responsibility in that regard. So that's what we have to consider here. Okay, moving on then to 11.50. Now, also just a little tool. If you can't ever remember how these documents flow together, 10.51, so 1051, is the document where you say, am I going to, are controls relevant, yes or no? And then where does it go to? Well, maybe it may sound funny to you, but you take the last one of the document, the 51 part, and you swap it with a 0. So you then go to 11.50. Okay. If you think I'm mad, you can forget about it. But this really was the one point that helped me to remember where am I going with this stuff. So in 1050, relevant controls, that's where I said, okay, where are controls going to be relevant. In 1150, there I go and I say, okay, so where do I now need to go and document the cycle, the controls? And here you can see the screen looks funny. Well, why? Well, because we are asked, well, first of all, because I haven't actually properly clicked on it. If I click on other, then I will see related parties. Okay. The other ones, if I just scroll down, accounting records, clearly somebody must also have said yes, so that's why I've got the information there. But then I've got these little blue lines that say no relevant controls were identified. Okay. You will also see that in non-current assets, for instance, where there's just absolutely nothing. Okay, does that make sense? Well, when I was considering every one of the accounts in non-current assets, I said controls are not relevant to these sections, which means I'll move on. Okay. In this specific account for revenue, I had said controls are relevant. So what do I find? I now need to do 7 things. Okay, 7 steps. I always advise that you start with step number 6. Call me mad or something, but this is the one that works for me. Step 6 says describe the system. In short, give me the cycle description. Tell me not about controls, tell me about the flow of information. They say there which the system or the process, how transactions are initiated, so started, recorded, processed, corrected as necessary, and then transferred to the GL. So where did this transaction start and what was the flow of information until it finally hit the GL and the financial statements by default. That's my system description. Now you can either write your story here, or if you still want to, you can use another document. Personally, I prefer to have it here, because what I do after that is I then scroll up to question 1 to 5 and I go and identify the relevant control activities. So what do I have there? I have firstly is there separation of duties. The standards define these 5 categories. Separation of duties, and the document specifically helps me then with regards to revenue. Secondly, is there an authorization procedure in place? Well, do we want to actually sell the stuff? Do we have the necessary inventory, etc., etc.? With debtors, one of the stuff is, does this guy actually still have credit? Okay, so some authorization procedure. And so forth. The other ones are records, assets that are safeguarded, and then of course, is there some process of checking whether this control activity or the cycle is actually working the way it should? Alright, so those are the 5 categories then that I go and consider. Just to have a look as to what I need to do, well, firstly, if the company has a control, I'll say yes. Okay. I'll only say yes if it's a properly designed control, because otherwise there's a weakness in any case. Okay. I'll describe the control in the 3rd column to say this is what the actual control is. Don't go and identify 20 controls or 5 controls. Identify the one that you feel is the strongest, the best one, the one you may want to carry forward. Then in the 4th column, the standards require you to, where there are control activities that are relevant, to go and identify the ones that are properly designed. So we've done that now in column 2 and 3. But then for those control activities, I must check whether it has been implemented. Note my words, I must check whether it's been implemented. Nothing says I must do a walkthrough. Okay? People fight with me and say, but the standard doesn't say you must do a walkthrough. I say, yeah, but practically, how else are you going to really do it? In 99% of the cases, a walkthrough is the most efficient way to test whether a control has been implemented. Alright, so you do the walkthrough, and then only do you get to the part that gives you a choice. Would you want to rely on this control, which really just means in plain English, do you want to test this control, yes or no? Right. As a last option, you may also, if you have premium, have the option to say, do you want to report the fact that there is a weakness in this control? This specific version, you will note there is still the current available version, 2011-0001. When we launched 2011-01, in one of these days, but I think it's going to be in August or so, when we release that, then you're going to be able to report an item or log a weakness for all items, even if there was a properly designed control.